Hey guys, tonight we step back into the arena, not the one you might know from flashy movies with overly dramatic deaths, but the real, dusty, noisy amphitheaters of ancient Rome. Imagine yourself standing in the center, sand grinding beneath your feet, the deafening cheers ringing in your ears, and sunlight beating down mercilessly. Forget your comfy mattress. You probably wouldn't survive this spectacle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see who's braving history tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, when people today hear gladiator, their minds often jump straight to scenes of bloody fights, dramatic thumb-down decisions, and gruesome ends. Thanks, Hollywood. But historically, gladiators weren't always living on the edge of death. Shocking. I know. They weren't simply disposable entertainment most of the time. In fact, gladiators were valuable assets, investments that arena owners wouldn't lightly waste. Sure, they fought with sharpened steel, nets, and exotic weapons, but the goal was rarely outright slaughter. Instead, gladiatorial combat was a skillful performance, almost theatrical, with fighters expertly choreographing combat moves to excite but rarely execute. And let's be real, killing off your star attraction every week? Not exactly a sustainable business model. Historians still argue whether the thumbs-down gesture truly meant death or perhaps signaled mercy. Ancient crowd gestures could be as confusing as modern-day emojis. But regardless, what we do know is gladiators often left the arena bruised, yes, but breathing, eager to fight another day. Let's unravel the real world behind the myths and see how much gentler reality could be. Imagine waking up in the pre-dawn darkness, air crisp and slightly tinged with the smoky aroma from last night's torches. The echo of feet shuffling on cold stone surrounds you. This is gladiator boot camp, and it's no weekend retreat. Welcome to the Ludus, the gladiator training school where skill, sweat, and strategy were blended into one grueling, yet oddly comforting, daily routine. You'd expect it to be pure brutality, right? Endless pain, Spartan-style punishments, and enough push-ups to collapse your spirit. And, okay, you wouldn't exactly be wrong. Training was intense. Gladiators were rigorously conditioned, their bodies honed into perfect fighting machines through constant drills. They practiced maneuvers with wooden swords heavier than their real counterparts to build strength and endurance. A quick aside, imagine lifting your coffee mug. If it weighed about 10 pounds, you might reconsider that extra sip. But here's the kicker. Gladiators actually receive pretty decent care and attention. Think about it. Your trainer, known as a lanista, had a vested interest in your well-being. Losing a top gladiator to negligence would be like tossing your paycheck out the window just for fun. So, gladiators had surprisingly structured diets, mostly vegetarian-heavy on beans and barley for muscle building. In fact, archaeologists cheekily call gladiators barley eaters because of their carb-rich diets. Imagine ancient keto enthusiasts shaking their heads in disappointment. Beyond diets, gladiators got regular medical checkups. Broken bones? No problem. There was a rudimentary but effective medical team ready to patch you up. And let's not forget massage therapy. Oh yes, massages were part of gladiator life because when you're dealing with daily sword clashes, your shoulders inevitably end up tighter than a modern-day commuter stuck in traffic. Historians still argue over whether gladiators willingly embraced this life or saw it purely as captivity. Many were slaves or prisoners of war, but some willingly joined up, enticed by fame, fortune, or even the camaraderie forged in the daily struggle. Sounds strangely familiar, doesn't it? Amid all the sweat and seriousness, gladiators even had leisure time. Dice games, jokes, storytelling around fire sit wasn't all gritty determination. After all, humans always find ways to unwind, even in extreme circumstances. Who knows, maybe gladiators cracked jokes about how ridiculous their training sandals looked or debated the latest arena gossip. So, gladiator boot camp wasn't simply survival of the fittest, it was careful nurturing combined with demanding physical trials. A place where strength grew from barley and camaraderie emerged from hardship, sculpting ordinary individuals into legends of the arena. As you navigate through ancient Rome's bustling streets, imagine posters crudely drawn yet strangely captivating plastered everywhere, depicting the rugged faces of your favorite gladiators. This isn't some casual fandom. These gladiators were the true superstars of their day. Think modern-day football or basketball icons, complete with fans who passionately argued about who would dominate the arena this season. Yes, gladiators had legit celebrity status, and with it came an astonishing blend of adoration, scandal, and endorsement deals. Well, ancient endorsement deals anyway. Picture this. You're a gladiator, victorious after a match, waving proudly to screaming fans. Later, merchants rush to offer you free products or money to mention their olive oil or wine at your next public appearance. Seriously, ancient Rome practically invented sponsored content, minus the Instagram selfies. Some gladiators became household names, celebrated not only for their strength and skills but also their distinctive personalities and charisma. Fans would collect souvenirs and memorabilia like figurines or tokens featuring gladiators' likenesses, think action figures, minus the posable joints. Die-hard supporters even joined fan clubs known as collegia, passionately debating tactics and matches, basically Reddit forums with togas and way fewer moderators. Gladiators had their own merch lines too. Yep, gladiatorial sweat was marketed as a perfume or aphrodisiac, talk about a quirky fringe tidbit. Imagine explaining to your date why you smell suspiciously like a sweaty gladiator, and somehow it's considered desirable. Ancient Rome's dating scene was definitely a vibe. Historians continue to debate just how deeply gladiators influenced social life beyond entertainment. Some argue they played a role in shaping Roman identity and values, while others see them purely as distractions from the empire's bigger problems, like the ancient equivalent of binge-watching reality TV to avoid thinking about your bills. And, like modern celebrities, gladiators dealt with public scrutiny. Gossip ran rampant through Rome's streets, spreading wild rumors about gladiators' secret romances or extravagant lifestyles. Imagine TMZ-style journalists, but with scrolls instead of cameras, whispering, "Did you see Spartacus at that exclusive bathhouse party last night?" Scandalous. Gladiator matches weren't just battles. They were events. Emperors and wealthy patricians sponsored games to win public favor, creating spectacles that blurred entertainment, politics, and social commentary. Gladiators stood at the epicenter, admired, envied, and debated by all classes of Roman society. So, as you picture yourself strolling through Rome, surrounded by vivid posters and whispered debates, remember, these gladiators weren't merely fighters, they were cultural icons, influencers long before the internet, shaping tastes, trends, and even ancient Rome's fragrance market. Fame, as it turns out, always had a price, and occasionally, that price was smelling like a sweaty gladiator. You're standing at the edge of a dimly lit armory, air thick with the scent of oil and iron. Around you, rows of weapons gleam dully, each whispering stories of past battles or, rather, past performances. Because, despite what movies might suggest, gladiators weren't all waving identical swords around. The reality was far more fascinating and bizarre. Sure, there's the iconic gladius, the short stabbing sword after which gladiators were named. But step beyond that familiar steel, and you'll find an array of weaponry worthy of any fantasy role-playing game. Picture yourself handling a retiarius's tools, a net, a trident, and a small dagger. You'd basically be the ancient Roman equivalent of Aquaman, minus the fish telepathy. Gladiators often fought in carefully orchestrated pairs, designed to showcase contrasting fighting styles. So you'd see heavily armored secutors lumbering after lightly armored retiarii, in what looked less like an outright brawl and more like an elaborately choreographed dance with pointed metal objects. Then there's the cestus, gloves embedded with spikes or blades. Yes, some gladiators literally fought bare-knuckled, decked out in gloves that could make Wolverine blush. Imagine your boxing class, but your gloves have knives sticking out. You might rethink sparring day. Another oddly popular weapon? The scissor, a metal tube ending in a curved blade. Historians still debate how effective this contraption actually was, but it looked impressive enough that audiences went wild. Because nothing thrills a crowd like the spectacle of novelty, even if it means wielding a weapon more impractical than your grandma's vintage egg slicer. And of course, there were unusual matchups involving exotic animals or unique opponents. Gladiators occasionally squared off against animals like ostriches or even giraffes, less lethal but definitely more bizarre. Picture yourself preparing for a fight, mentally rehearsing combat moves, only to find out your opponent is a giant bird known mostly for running really fast and hiding its head in the sand. In this strange arsenal, some weapons carried symbolic meaning. For example, the murmillo armed with sword and shield, helmet adorned with a fish represented Neptune's power, bringing mythology into the arena. Gladiatorial combat often wove such symbolism throughout its spectacle, creating layers of meaning for the audience beyond mere fighting. As weird as some gladiator weapon choices seem today, they were essential elements of a well-orchestrated show. Arena battles weren't typically mindless violence. Instead, they were strategic, visually intriguing events designed to captivate an audience craving both excitement and novelty. So next time you think of gladiators, forget uniform sword-swinging warriors. Imagine instead a vivid array of tools, each more unique and sometimes questionable than the last. Because history, especially gladiatorial history, always has room for a touch of eccentricity. Picture yourself stepping onto the sandy arena floor, sunlight catching the glint of polished metal and colorful fabrics. Gladiators didn't just fight, they dressed for success, with gear that perfectly blended style and function. These warriors knew appearances mattered, and their outfits were as carefully considered as a modern-day celebrity picking the perfect red carpet look. Starting at the top, helmets were masterpieces of practical art. Some were elaborately decorated with crests or intimidating masks, creating personas as vivid as comic book heroes or villains. The murmillo's helmet famously bore a fish crest impressive in battle, though perhaps slightly embarrassing in casual conversation. Yes, I'm the guy with the fish helmet. And no, it's not an aquarium advertisement. Next came armor, carefully chosen for balance between protection and agility. Gladiators typically didn't wear full-body armor that was reserved for soldiers. Instead, they used specialized gear like the manica segmented arm guard that was both flexible and protective. Imagine modern athletes' compression sleeves, but made of overlapping metal scales because gladiators were nothing if not trendsetters. Then, there's the iconic loincloth or sublegaculum. Practical? Check. Fashion forward? Well, perhaps debatable, but it certainly offered freedom of movement. You might chuckle at the idea, but this minimal clothing was key to swift, unencumbered combat. Honestly, though, imagine the anxiety of fighting to the cheers of thousands while basically wearing an ancient Speedo. Confidence was definitely a gladiator's secret weapon. Some gladiators even wore greaves metal shin protectors. If you've ever accidentally bumped your shin against a coffee table, you instantly understand the appeal of such gear. These weren't just random fashion choices. Each item had strategic value, carefully balancing safety and mobility. But gladiators weren't above a bit of flair. Colorful tunics, dramatic capes, or distinctive armor embellishments distinguished different fighters, adding drama and identity. Gladiators understood brand building long before social media influencers made personal branding trendy. And speaking of quirky fashion, gladiators often wore amulets or lucky charms. These weren't mere accessories but deeply personal talismans, believed to protect them from harm or boost their prowess. Imagine stepping into battle wearing a lucky rabbit's footer. In a gladiator's case, maybe a lion's tooth, hoping the universe appreciated your sense of irony. Historians still debate the extent to which costume choices affected the outcome of matches. Did a particularly intimidating helmet truly unsettle opponents, or was it just showmanship for the crowd? Regardless, gladiators understood that style played a crucial psychological role both for themselves and for those watching. As you mentally walk around the arena, taking in the striking and diverse costumes, remember, gladiators were more than warriors, they were performers, athletes, and style icons. And whether facing down fierce opponents or just battling a questionable fashion choice, gladiators embraced the idea that confidence, charisma, and the right outfit could make all the difference. Imagine yourself waking up in the gladiator barracks, your senses slowly tuning into the sounds of chatter and laughter, the aroma of breakfast wafting through the air. While Hollywood might suggest gladiators spent every waking moment in battle, reality was far more mundane and infinitely more human. Their daily lives were a curious blend of routine, camaraderie, and occasional absurdity. Morning in the ludus began with hearty meals, not lavish feasts, but carefully curated diets designed for peak performance. Gladiators often consumed barley porridge, a staple, to fuel their muscles and keep them energized. Remember those barley eaters we talked about? Exactly. Add some beans, vegetables, and occasionally fish, and you've got a meal plan that would probably get a thumbs up from modern nutritionists. Training sessions followed breakfast, rigorous yet structured. Drills with wooden swords, tactical simulations, strength training, all conducted under the vigilant eye of the lanista, their stern trainer who balanced discipline with genuine concern for the gladiator's well-being. Think of a stern but fair coach from your high school sports days minus the polyester tracksuit. And, after training, surprisingly enough, leisure. Yes, gladiators had downtime where dice games, storytelling, and friendly banter filled their hours. Picture yourself relaxing in the shade, trading jokes with fellow gladiators, teasing one another about the match outcomes, or perhaps ribbing a newcomer about his overly fancy sandals, because even ancient warriors appreciated good-natured roasting. Life behind bars in gladiator schools wasn't always luxurious, but it was structured. There were routines, predictable patterns that created a rhythm and community among these fighters. Yet, their lives could be unpredictably quirky. For instance, gladiators were often quite superstitious, carrying lucky charms or performing personal rituals. Imagine watching a fellow fighter carefully arranging his amulets before battle, whispering incantations to the gods, a ritual oddly reminiscent of a modern athlete's pre-game routine. Historians still argue over how harsh or lenient conditions really were in these schools. Some suggest gladiators were treated relatively well, considering their societal status, while others point out they remained essentially prisoners, albeit valuable ones. It's a nuanced reality, neither purely oppressive nor entirely comfortable. Interestingly, gladiators even had access to basic healthcare and medical treatments. Physicians regularly checked injuries, prescribed herbal remedies, or recommended rest periods. Imagine complaining to your lanista about sore muscles, only to be prescribed rest and an herbal bath, probably a far better response than many modern-day workplaces offer. Despite the hardships, there was genuine camaraderie among gladiators, bonds formed by shared challenges and experiences. They lived, trained, and often dreamed of freedom or glory together, forming friendships akin to soldiers in combat. It's easy to overlook these quieter moments when imagining gladiators solely as arena spectacles. So, the next time you picture gladiator life, remember it was far more complex and relatable than mere survival. Gladiators lived and laughed, fought and rested, bonded over barley porridge and dice games. They were more than just combatants. They were humans navigating the daily dance of survival, camaraderie, and hope. You're standing at the edge of the bustling arena, eyes scanning across the chaos of combatants, cheering crowds and flapping banners. Amidst all this drama and spectacle, one figure surprisingly stands out: not a fighter, not an emperor, but a referee. Yes, you heard that right. Gladiatorial matches had refs, and their roles were more crucial and less bloody than Hollywood would have you believe. Picture this. You're a gladiator mid-fight, adrenaline pumping, ears ringing with crowd noise, when suddenly a whistle pierces through the mayhem. Okay, maybe not an actual whistle. Ancient Rome hadn't quite invented that, but referees did have recognizable gestures and verbal signals to pause or end a fight. Their job was to keep the combat fair and entertaining, not necessarily fatal. Gladiatorial combat, after all, was more theatrical than lethal. Matches were choreographed displays of skill and bravery. The ref, known as the summa rudis, supervised these bouts closely, ensuring neither fighter stepped out of bounds literally or figuratively. Think of them as ancient umpires or boxing referees, minus the striped shirts and funny hats. And here's the surprising bit. Referees were often retired gladiators themselves. Who better to judge a match's fairness than someone who'd survived countless bouts? Imagine a retired champion standing there, arms crossed, judging your form. You call that a thrust? Back in my day, we'd have called that dancing. Refs had specific signals to halt fights temporarily, especially if one gladiator was injured or the fight drifted from entertainment to real danger. The last thing a lanista wanted was to lose a valuable gladiator prematurely. So, referees monitored fights carefully, their actions subtly guiding the audience's emotional reaction, sometimes even urging mercy. This brings us to one of history's quirkiest myths, the notorious thumbs up or thumbs down gesture. Historians still passionately debate its real meaning. Was a thumbs up a sign of mercy, meaning let him live, or did it signal execution? It turns out we aren't completely sure. Ancient records are frustratingly unclear. The confusion remains an ancient version of the eternal "does pineapple belong on pizza?" debate, except with significantly higher stakes. Referees sometimes influence the decision-making process, interacting with the crowd or emperor, subtly steering them towards mercy. After all, a referee's reputation hinged not just on fairness but also on popularity, because nobody likes the guy responsible for killing off the crowd favorite. Additionally, the refs maintained rules regarding equipment and fair play. A gladiator dropping his weapon, for example, would trigger a pause. Imagine being mid-battle and your opponent drops his sword. Suddenly, you're awkwardly standing around, waiting for your enemy to retrieve it, possibly while exchanging some embarrassed nods or shrugs. In the chaotic whirlwind of ancient Roman arenas, referees were essential. They humanized a spectacle often remembered only for its brutality. They embodied an odd mix of authority, performance, and genuine concern for fighters' welfare. So, next time you imagine gladiatorial combat, spare a thought for the humble referee, unsung hero who often stood quietly, ensuring the spectacle stayed thrilling, fair, and far less fatal than many assume. Imagine stepping into the arena, heart pounding with excitement, yet knowing your performance isn't just about defeating an opponent, about captivating a crowd. Gladiators were, in many ways, the original masters of audience engagement. Your real battle wasn't just against the person facing you, it was against boredom and distraction among thousands of spectators craving entertainment. Picture this. As you circle your opponent, the roar from the stands surges and falls, guiding your every move. Your actions become deliberate, choreographed, designed not only to overpower but to impress. Gladiators understood that applause often determined their fate far more reliably than the swing of their sword. After all, pleasing the crowd might mean survival even if you technically lost. Performances in the arena combined skill, theatrics, and tactical drama. Gladiators employed flashy, crowd-pleasing maneuver spins, feints, and dramatic recoveries from seemingly impossible setbacks. Consider it the ancient Roman equivalent of pro wrestling, complete with heroes, villains, and scripted rivalries designed to thrill fans and keep them coming back. Audience interactions mattered greatly. Gladiators often developed signature moves, recognizable to loyal fans who eagerly anticipated these special moments. A cleverly timed pose or an exaggerated victory stance could earn deafening cheers, turning a simple match into an unforgettable spectacle. Imagine having a signature move known throughout Ramith Gladiator equivalent of Michael Jackson's moonwalk. Historians still debate exactly how much of gladiatorial combat was staged versus genuine combat. Some matches were undeniably brutal and real, while others were clearly choreographed for entertainment purposes. This mixture blurred lines, making gladiatorial games unique part sport, part theater, fully engaging. Gladiators also learned crowd psychology, how to read and respond to audience moods. If a fight seemed dull, quick improvisation was necessary. Perhaps a few dramatic tumbles, exaggerated grimaces, or an extra flourish of the sword would reignite crowd interest. It was like being both actor and director simultaneously, constantly attuned to audience reactions. Occasionally, gladiators would pause deliberately to acknowledge their fans, waving or nodding appreciatively. Picture yourself pausing mid-battle, giving a quick salute to a cheering section. It might seem risky, but such gestures built personal connections with fans, turning mere spectators into loyal followers. The crowd's role wasn't passive either, they actively influenced outcomes. Gladiators skilled in reading audience reactions could sway crowd sentiments toward mercy or victory. Imagine the adrenaline rush of not just fighting but actively shaping the narrative of your own survival. Ultimately, successful gladiators mastered the art of spectacle, understanding deeply that their careers depended as much on charisma and performance as combat skill. So, while films might focus heavily on bloody conclusions, reality often saw gladiators winning hearts rather than ending lives. As you stand amidst imaginary cheers echoing around you, remember, gladiators didn't merely survive by strength, they thrived by pleasing, captivating, and connecting with an audience craving drama, suspense, and, occasionally, a cleverly timed crowd-winning wink. You're in the arena again. Your breath steady but heavy, sweat dripping down your brow. The fight is nearing its climax, the audience's cheers and jeers blending into one continuous roar. Suddenly, your opponent falls not critically wounded, just convincingly defeated. Now, all eyes turn toward you and the awaiting judgment from the crowd, or perhaps even the emperor himself. But here's the twist history often overlooks. Mercy was far more common than you've been led to believe. In the vivid imagination of popular culture, gladiatorial matches usually end in grim death. But in reality, survival was not only possible, it was often expected. Remember, gladiators were investments, and owners hated losing valuable assets unnecessarily. Killing every losing fighter simply wasn't good economics. Imagine the absurdity of destroying your expensive car every time it ran out of gas. So, how did mercy work exactly? After a decisive moment, if a gladiator yielded or fell, he would signal for mercy by raising a finger or dropping to a knee. Then came the infamous thumb gesture from the crowd, or, more likely, the emperor or game organizer. But historians still vigorously debate the meaning of thumbs up or thumbs down signals. Some insist thumbs down meant mercy, like lower your weapons. Others argue the opposite. Either way, the gesture symbolized a critical juncture where life hung in the balance of popular opinion. Mercy wasn't random, it often depended heavily on a gladiator's reputation, performance, or even charisma. If you'd fought bravely, entertained brilliantly, or had become popular among fans, your chances of survival soared. Essentially, being likable was as important as your sword skills. Gladiators were, after all, ancient celebrities, and no one enjoys killing their favorite celebrity most of the time anyway. Occasionally, losing gladiators might win the crowd's favor through dramatic performances of surrender, theatrical pleas, or by showing genuine camaraderie toward an opponent. Picture the emotional drama of kneeling before your victor, dramatically acknowledging their superiority, and thereby subtly courting public sympathy. Gladiators were masterful in manipulating emotions, both theirs and the crowd's. Interestingly, some gladiators accumulated multiple losses yet survived repeatedly, becoming popular precisely because of their underdog stories. Imagine being famous primarily for not dying, a curious blend of resilience and sheer luck, like a cat repeatedly dodging trouble. When gladiators did finally retire, often after earning their freedom through a series of successful performances, they could live relatively peaceful lives. Some became trainers, referees, or even celebrities endorsing products or attending public events. Retirement, for a gladiator, could be surprisingly gentle and prosperous, assuming they avoided any lasting grudges from defeated opponents. Mercy, then, wasn't just occasional leniency, it was part of a carefully choreographed social drama. Gladiatorial combat wasn't always life or death. Frequently, it was about winning hearts rather than taking lives. As you stand amidst imaginary cheers, remember that these arenas saw more mercy than slaughter, more applause than anguish. So next time you're tempted to envision gladiatorial combat as purely brutal, recall that human empathy, drama, and economics frequently led to compassion rather than cruelty, making the arena less a death trap and more a stage for human drama in all its complexity. Imagine standing beneath the vast shadow of the Colosseum, feeling the tremors of thousands of stamping feet reverberating through your bones. Gladiatorial matches were spectacular events, yes, but they weren't simply entertainment. Behind the scenes, hidden in the shadows cast by the mighty walls, was a subtle yet powerful game of politics playing out before the cheering crowds. You see, gladiatorial games were as much about politics and power as they were about entertainment. Wealthy politicians and emperors often sponsored these elaborate spectacles not just to amuse the masses, but to win their loyalty and boost their popularity. Think of it as ancient Rome's version of hosting the Olympics or a World Cup, huge events with significant political payoff. Gladiatorial games were incredibly costly, lavish affairs. Imagine investing fortunes just to sway public opinion or enhance a ruler's prestige. An emperor who organized memorable games could secure his popularity and stabilize his reign, much like a modern politician boosting approval ratings by funding popular public projects or events. Historians still debate just how politically influential these events were. Some scholars argue that gladiatorial games significantly shaped Roman politics, providing a platform for rulers to demonstrate power and generosity. Others suggest their impact was subtler, serving as distractions rather than drivers of real political change. Yet, undeniably, gladiatorial spectacles were entangled deeply with political ambitions. Imagine yourself in the arena again, this time as a gladiator, aware that your performance wasn't merely for glory but influenced powerful political narratives. Victories or defeats, acts of mercy or brutality, could sway public sentiment, indirectly affecting political stability. Gladiators, knowingly or not, became pawns in high-stakes games beyond their immediate comprehension. Politicians understood that controlling public opinion required spectacle. Lavish games featuring exotic animals, staged battles, and famous gladiators symbolized strength, wealth, and generosity. A well-timed spectacle could deflect attention from scandals, economic hardship, or unpopular policies. Imagine a modern-day government releasing distracting celebrity news precisely when a crisis unfolds. Ancient Romans mastered this tactic centuries ago. Even emperors themselves sometimes entered the political fray directly within the arena. Commodus, infamous for his obsession with gladiators, personally fought staged matches to portray himself as both heroic and relatable to common Romans. Picture a modern political leader stepping into a boxing ring or joining a televised contest to boost their popularity. Absurd, yet undeniably effective. Games also allowed emperors to visibly demonstrate mercy or justice through symbolic gestures. A dramatic pardon or execution decided by imperial thumb could reinforce an emperor's perceived fairness or strength. Imagine the calculated drama of sparing a beloved gladiator. Cheers erupt, gratitude flows, and political goodwill surges. Roman rulers knew precisely how to orchestrate such emotionally charged moments. So, as you stand there beneath the towering Colosseum walls, remember the gladiatorial spectacle wasn't just about personal triumph or defeat. It was a meticulously choreographed political performance. Gladiators fought, crowds cheered, but behind each thrilling clash lay carefully calculated moves in Rome's endless game of power, popularity, and political survival. Step back into the arena, and this time, picture something that Hollywood often overlooks. Fierce women standing confidently on the sandy floor, weapons gleaming, eyes focused and determined. Yes, female gladiators existed, and their stories, though frequently forgotten or glossed over, are among the most intriguing of ancient Rome's hidden tales. Imagine yourself watching a woman gladiator, known as a gladiatrix, entering the arena to the roar of a crowd. She was a rare sight, but not unheard of. In fact, inscriptions and reliefs from ancient Rome depict female gladiators battling with the same intensity and skill as their male counterparts. They weren't novelties. They were respected fighters who captivated audiences with their prowess and bravery. Historians still debate how common female gladiators actually were. Some scholars argue they were primarily exotic attractions, unusual spectacles, rather than regular combatants. Others assert that these women fought seriously, proving themselves repeatedly in the brutal testing ground of public opinion. Imagine the adrenaline-fueled courage required to break gender barriers in such a public, high-stakes environment. Female gladiators often came from varied backgrounds, just like their male counterparts. Some were slaves or captives, thrust unwillingly into combat. But intriguingly, historical records also reveal that some women volunteered, drawn by fame, fortune, or the sheer thrill of combat. Imagine deliberately stepping into an arena, armed and ready, knowing you'd be judged not only for your fighting skills but also for challenging societal norms. These female warriors had distinctive armor and gear. Roman artists sometimes depicted gladiatrices fighting with minimal armor, highlighting their courage and vulnerability. Yet archaeological finds indicate that many wore protective gear identical to men's helmets, greaves, and armored sleeves, ready for serious combat. Imagine the pride and defiance in their choice to stand toe-to-toe with male gladiators, demanding equal recognition. Interestingly, female gladiator bouts weren't always taken lightly. Emperor Domitian once organized lavish games featuring women, underscoring their legitimacy as serious fighters. The spectacle was not merely comic relief or trivial entertainment. These matches demanded genuine skill and drew genuine admiration. Think of it like the ancient equivalent of groundbreaking moments in modern women's sports history. Yet female gladiators faced societal ambivalence. On one hand, they could earn fame and respect. On the other, traditional Romans sometimes viewed these women skeptically, uncomfortable with their defiance of societal norms. Imagine the whispered debates. The intrigue and scandal their appearances stirred. Roman society wasn't entirely ready to accept these formidable women wholeheartedly. Despite their ambiguous social standing, gladiatrices left a lasting legacy. They challenged conventions and demonstrated bravery not only within the arena but also in broader Roman society. Imagine being a Roman woman in the stands, watching a female gladiator triumph, feeling inspired and emboldened by her courage. So, as you envision the ancient arena once more, remember these overlooked heroines. Their stories, though largely obscured by history, speak loudly of courage, determination, and the timeless human drive to challenge boundaries, break stereotypes, and stand proudly, defiant and fearless, against the odds. Imagine stepping into a quiet room away from the roaring crowds, the air scented with herbs and oils rather than sweat and blood. This might surprise you, but gladiators had surprisingly sophisticated healthcare designed not just to patch up injuries, but to maintain peak physical condition because, as we've noted, gladiators were expensive investments. Losing them prematurely to untreated wounds or preventable ailments simply wasn't smart business. Picture yourself reclining on a simple cot as the physician approaches. Ancient doctors who treated gladiators were among the best available. They knew about cleaning wounds meticulously, using vinegar or wine primitive antiseptics that might sting like crazy, but definitely kept infection at bay. Next time you complain about disinfectant stinging, imagine doing it with strong vinegar. Ouch. But gladiatorial medicine went beyond mere patchwork. Physicians prescribed carefully planned diets heavy in carbohydrates, mainly barley and beans, to keep muscles strong and bodies resilient. Remember our barley eaters? Gladiators sometimes received a strange concoction known as ash drink, made from charred plants, believed to strengthen bones and reduce fatigue in ancient sports drink that probably tasted as questionable as it sounds. Historians still debate how effective these ancient nutritional methods were. Some argue gladiators had superior strength and stamina thanks to their diet. Others suggest the benefits were more psychological, placebo effects driven by belief rather than genuine nutritional advantages. Either way, gladiators swore by their barley-rich meals, possibly because arguing with tradition, especially in a gladiator school, wasn't exactly encouraged. Gladiators also benefited from therapeutic baths, massages, and even rudimentary physical therapy. Imagine after a strenuous fight, settling into a soothing herbal bath or receiving a thorough massage to relieve sore muscles. If you think your modern spa day is luxurious, just remember gladiators were enjoying these treatments centuries ago, though their settings might have been less polished marble and more rough-hewn stone. Quirky fringe remedies also featured prominently. Gladiators sometimes used ointments made from animal fat, honey, and bizarre herbal blends to promote healing. Imagine applying honey-infused ointments, which probably attracted curious insects as often as they healed wounds. Another peculiar practice was the use of copper implements, believed to enhance recovery through some mysterious alchemy-like property. Imagine explaining your recovery regimen includes rubbing copper on your injuries. No doubt a lively conversation starter. Interestingly, ancient gladiators' skeletal remains often reveal healed injuries, suggesting they received substantial medical care. Broken bones carefully reset, infections treated effectively all indicate systematic medical practices. These weren't just crude battlefield medics. Gladiator physicians were trained professionals dedicated to long-term athlete care. Gladiators thus existed at the fascinating intersection of healthcare, superstition, and cutting-edge ancient medical practices. They were cared for, maintained, and rehabilitated much like modern elite athletes, albeit with more vinegar and fewer high-tech gadgets. So, next time you picture gladiators, remember their surprisingly humane and sophisticated medical treatments, proof that, even in the harshest circumstances, human ingenuity and compassion can shine through. Imagine yourself peering through the barred gates of the gladiator quarters, eyes fixed not on the arena ahead, but on the open countryside beyond. For some gladiators, the dream wasn't fame or victory, it was escape. Despite relatively good conditions compared to typical slavery, the life of a gladiator was, at its core, captivity. Freedom often remained a tantalizingly close yet frustratingly unreachable dream. Escaping from a ludus was a risky proposition, These training schools were secure, heavily guarded compounds designed specifically to prevent any breakout attempts. But gladiators, resourceful and courageous, occasionally dared to defy their captors. Imagine the nerve-wracking decision-making, assessing risks and opportunities, knowing that failure could mean severe punishment or even death. Historical records occasionally tell of dramatic escapes, some successful, others less so. Perhaps the most famous example was Spartacus, the gladiator turned rebel who famously broke free and led a massive slave rebellion. Picture Spartacus rallying his fellow gladiators, turning their training into powerful rebellion. His legacy, a mix of legend and history, symbolizes courage, resistance, and the eternal human desire for freedom. Not every escape was as grand or dramatic. Some gladiators managed quiet escapes, slipping unnoticed from distracted guards or cleverly exploiting security gaps. Imagine yourself waiting patiently for the right moment, heart pounding, every shadow becoming both a friend and a potential betrayer. Quiet escapes were about patience, cunning, and meticulous planning skills ironically honed by gladiatorial training itself. Quirky escape attempts also dotted gladiator history. There are records of gladiators disguising themselves occasionally hilariously unsuccessfully to slip past guards. Imagine the embarrassment of being caught disguised poorly, your hastily assembled toga or suspiciously oversized helmet instantly revealing your true identity. Even in ancient Rome, comedic errors in judgment could ruin an otherwise clever escape. Historians still debate how frequently escape attempts occurred and how many succeeded. Were gladiators continually plotting freedom, or was escape relatively rare, given the security and relative comfort compared to harsher forms of slavery? The reality was likely nuanced, with escapes both desperate and opportunistic, motivated by personal circumstances rather than universal conditions. When escapes did fail, punishment was severe. Recaptured gladiators faced beatings, harsher confinement, or, ironically, even being sold into harsher forms of slavery. Yet, despite the risk, many gladiators deemed freedom worth any cost. Imagine the courage and determination required to risk everything, even life itself, for just a chance at liberty. The stories of gladiatorial escape attempts remind us of their humanity, their desperate longing for freedom, and their courage to challenge seemingly impossible circumstances. They were not merely performers in the arena, but individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams that transcended their violent, controlled existence. So, as you envision yourself standing by that gate, remember those gladiators who dared to risk it all. Their bravery, ingenuity, and sheer audacity provide enduring reminders that freedom, however elusive, always beckons and always inspires. Standing once more within the imaginary arena, let's pull back the curtain on gladiatorial matches, separating sensationalized fiction from quiet reality. Despite popular belief and Hollywood dramatization, gladiatorial fights weren't constant death matches. In fact, deaths were less frequent than many assume, a revelation that tends to surprise modern audiences hooked on tales of relentless Roman brutality. Gladiators were valuable investments, trained at significant expense. Their deaths meant a financial loss, discouraging unnecessary bloodshed. Think about it. Repeatedly killing off highly trained fighters after every match would be as financially reckless as regularly setting fire to your own wallet. Arena managers and sponsors preferred their gladiators alive and fighting or performing another day. Matches often featured careful choreography. Gladiators trained extensively not just in combat skills, but also in performance, designed to enthrall rather than annihilate. Picture a fight that looks fierce but maintains a measure of restraint, ensuring entertainment without tragic endings. Gladiators, after all, understood their roles as performers, blending skillful combat with dramatic flair. Historians still debate how choreographed these fights truly were. Some scholars argue gladiatorial matches were essentially staged performances with predetermined outcomes ancient pro wrestling. Essentially, others contend fights were genuinely competitive but regulated to minimize fatalities. This scholarly tug-of-war continues, leaving a nuanced and complex historical picture that resists oversimplification. Interestingly, matches could end in draws or stalemates. Referees, we know, actively intervened to prevent unnecessary death. Imagine the strange yet civilized notion of a gladiatorial tie to exhausted fighters, neither clearly superior, both spared by the judgment of referee or audience. The anticlimax might seem odd today, but it was entirely acceptable and practical in ancient Rome. Occasional fights did end fatally, usually due to accidents or deliberate executions involving condemned criminals rather than trained gladiators. But these deaths were more exception than rule, despite the persistent image of gladiators as doomed warriors. Most gladiators fought multiple battles over their careers, with scars and stories accumulating over time. Imagine growing old enough to retire from combat proof of survival and sustained skill. Then there were the symbolic and ritual aspects of gladiatorial combat. Matches sometimes mirrored Roman myths or historical battles, turning the arena into a stage for storytelling. Gladiators embodied legendary heroes or foes, their battles reenacting historical triumphs and defeats. Think of it as theater with real stakes, imaginative, dramatic, yet rarely as bloody as popularly depicted. This nuanced reality reveals gladiators as skilled performers and respected professionals, rather than mere fodder for brutal entertainment. The arena wasn't simply a place of bloodshed. It was a stage where combat skill met storytelling, physical prowess combined with dramatic narrative. It was spectacle layered with meaning, designed to engage audiences without needless loss of life. As you reflect on gladiatorial combat, remember this subtle complexity. Gladiators weren't simply killers or victims. They were athletes, performers, and occasionally unwilling actors in a carefully orchestrated spectacle. Understanding this richer, gentler truth allows us to appreciate gladiators not merely as historical curiosities, but as human beings navigating a delicate dance between reality and performance. Imagine the roar of the Colosseum slowly fading away, the echoes of cheering crowds growing softer, the bright banners gently unraveling into threads of quiet history. Like every great era, the age of gladiators eventually dimmed, not ending with a dramatic clash, but with a gradual, almost gentle decline. Gladiatorial combat, once a cornerstone of Roman entertainment and identity, faced increasing criticism as Rome transformed. Early Christian writers passionately opposed the arena's violence, emphasizing compassion and condemning cruelty. Imagine the first voices courageously rising, questioning the morality of something so deeply ingrained in society, a quiet revolution brewing beneath the surface. Political shifts also contributed to gladiators' twilight. Emperors began to realize that lavish spectacles drained resources better spent elsewhere. Battles with wild beasts, or extravagant staged naval fights, once regular features, gradually became rarer. Imagine Rome's rulers quietly recalculating priorities, deciding subtly that grandeur was less important than governance. Historians still debate precisely why gladiatorial games ended. Some attribute their demise primarily to moral awakening influenced by Christianity, while others highlight economic factors and shifting public tastes. In truth, like many historical shifts, it was likely a combination of factors of slow societal evolution rather than a single dramatic event. Gladiators themselves slowly faded from the public eye. Without the arena's constant demand, gladiator schools closed, and fighters moved on to quieter pursuits. Many gladiators, freed from the relentless spectacle, embraced peaceful retirement, straining others, farming, or even teaching. Imagine an ex-gladiator trading his sword for a quiet life, recounting stories of past battles by a gentle hearth. Audiences gradually shifted their entertainment preferences too, favoring less violent spectacles. Chariot races remained popular, thrilling yet less deadly. Plays, musical performances, and other artistic entertainments gained prominence, reflecting a quieter, more contemplative society emerging from Rome's tumultuous past. Eventually, gladiatorial combat was formally abolished in the early 5th century, quietly vanishing from Rome's cultural landscape. The last recorded fights lacked the dramatic intensity of earlier eras, taking place far from Rome's grandeur. Imagine the final gladiators stepping into an arena, sensing that history had moved on, their fierce performances now echoes rather than center-stage events. Yet the gladiators' legacy remained embedded in cultural memory, captivating imaginations long after their arenas grew silent. Their stories persisted, transformed into legends, cautionary tales, and symbols of courage, strength, and resilience. Imagine ancient Romans nostalgically recalling gladiatorial games, much as we today reminisce about cherished cultural traditions from our past. As the gentle decline of gladiatorial games unfolded, the lessons and humanity of these fighters endured, gently reminding future generations of the complex balance between entertainment, morality, and human dignity. Their stories, filled with bravery, spectacle, compassion, and complexity, continue to speak softly yet powerfully across centuries. Now, as the lights dim and our journey gently concludes, feel the echoes of history softly fade. Take a deep breath, letting yourself relax into the quiet comfort of time's gentle passage, appreciating the delicate threads that bind us all, past and present. Feel your breath steady as the arena around you gently dissolves into soft twilight. Each echo grows quieter, softer, fading into a tranquil hush. Imagine the murmurs of history settling gently. The grand stadium now silent, the sky above deepening into a peaceful shade of evening blue. Allow yourself to relax into this calm, your muscles releasing tension as you drift into the comforting quiet of historical memory. Let the stories of these ancient fighters ease gently into your thoughts, less as fierce combatants now, and more as familiar friends whose stories have softly guided you tonight. Their struggles and victories, ambitions and dreams resonate gently, reminding you of your own quiet battles and peaceful triumphs. Feel gratitude for this gentle exploration, for the quiet wisdom gained, for the gentle echoes of the past still whispering softly. With each breath, imagine the boundaries of time softly melting away, connecting you with the quiet resilience and enduring humanity shared by generations long past. Relax further, feeling yourself sinking comfortably into the embrace of restfulness, knowing tonight's journey through history will continue to guide and soothe you gently. Rest now, letting the peaceful echoes carry you into calm, restful sleep.